A startup is a company that is in the first stage of its operations. These companies are often initially bankrolled by their entrepreneurial founders as they attempt to capitalize on developing a product or service for which they believe there is a demand. Today we gonna talk about 15 mistakes that kill startups. 1. Single founder. What's wrong with having one founder? To start with, it's a vote of no confidence. It probably means the founder couldn't talk any of his friends into starting the company with him. That's pretty alarming, because his friends are the ones who know him best. The low points in a startup are so low that few could bear them alone. When you have multiple founders, esprit de corps binds them together in a way that seems to violate conservation laws. Each thinks, I can't let my friends down. This is one of the most powerful forces in human nature, and it's missing when there's just one founder. 2. Bad location. It's an interesting question why cities become startup hubs, but the reason startups prosper in them is probably the same as it is for any industry: that's where the experts are. Standards are higher, people are more sympathetic to what you're doing, the kind of people you want to hire want to live there, supporting industries are there, the people you run into in chance meetings are in the same business. Who knows exactly how these factors combine to boost startups in Silicon Valley and squish them in Detroit, but it's clear they do from the number of startups per capita in each. 3. Marginal niche, choosing a small, obscure niche in the hope of avoiding competition. If you watch little kids playing sports, you notice that below a certain age they're afraid of the ball. When the ball comes near them, their instinct is to avoid it. I didn't make a lot of catches as an 8-year-old outfielder, because whenever a fly ball came my way, I used to close my eyes and hold my glove up more for protection than in the hope of catching it. Choosing a marginal project is the startup equivalent of my 8-year-old strategy for dealing with fly balls. If you make anything good, you're going to have competitors, so you may as well face that. You can only avoid competition by avoiding good ideas. 4. Derivative idea. Many of the applications we get are imitations of some existing company. That's one source of ideas, but not the best. If you look at the origins of successful startups, few were started in imitation of some other startup. Where did they get their ideas? Usually from some specific, unsolved problem the founders identified. It seems like the best problems to solve are ones that affect you personally. Apple happened because Steve Wozniak wanted a computer, Google because Larry and Sergey couldn't find stuff online. Hotmail because Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith couldn't exchange email at work. So instead of copying the Facebook, with some variation that the Facebook rightly ignored, look for ideas from the other direction. 5. Choosing the wrong platform. For example, I think a lot of startups during the bubble killed themselves by deciding to build server-based applications on Windows. Hotmail was still running on FreeBSD for years after Microsoft bought it, presumably because Windows couldn't handle the load. If Hotmail's founders had chosen to use Windows, they would have been swamped. 6. Slowness in launching. Companies of all sizes have a hard time getting software done. It's intrinsic to the medium, software is always 85% done. It takes an effort of will to push through this and get something released to users. Several distinct problems manifest themselves as delays in launching, working too slowly, not truly understanding the problem, fear of having to deal with users, fear of being judged, working on too many different things, excessive perfectionism. Fortunately, you can combat all of them by the simple expedient of forcing yourself to launch something fairly quickly. 7. Launching too early. Launching too slowly has probably killed 100 times more startups than launching too fast, but it is possible to launch too fast. The danger here is that you ruin your reputation. You launch something, the early adopters try it out, and if it's no good they may never come back. 8. Having no specific user in mind. You can't build things for users like without understanding them. I mentioned earlier that the most successful startups seem to have begun by trying to solve a problem their founders had. 9. Raising too little money. Most successful startups take funding at some point. Like having more than one founder, it seems a good bet statistically. How much should you take though? Too little money means not enough to get airborne. What airborne means depends on the situation. It depends on investors, because until you're profitable that's who you have to convince. So if you take money from investors, you have to take enough to get to the next step, whatever that is. 10. Spending too much. It's hard to distinguish spending too much from raising too little. If you raised 5 million and ran out of money, you probably spent too much. 11. Poor investor management. As a founder, you have to manage your investors. You shouldn't ignore them, because they may have useful insights. But neither should you let them run the company. That's supposed to be your job. If investors had sufficient vision to run the companies they fund, why didn't they start them? 12. Sacrificing users to supposed profit. When I said at the beginning that if you make something users want, you'll be fine, you may have noticed I didn't mention anything about having the right business model. That's not because making money is unimportant. I'm not suggesting that founders start companies with no chance of making money in the hope of unloading them before they tank. The reason we tell founders not to worry about the business model initially is that making something people want is so much harder. I don't know why it's so hard to make something people want. It seems like it should be straightforward. But you can tell it must be hard by how few startups do it. It is irresponsible not to think about business models. It's just 10 times more irresponsible not to think about the product. 13. Not wanting to get your hands dirty. Nearly all programmers would rather spend their time writing code and have someone else handle the messy business of extracting money from it. Larry and Sergey apparently felt this way too at first. After developing their new search algorithm, the first thing they tried was to get some other company to buy it. Start a company? Yeah. Most hackers would rather just have ideas. But as Larry and Sergey found, there's not much of a market for ideas. No one trusts an idea till you embody it in a product and use that to grow a user base. Then they'll pay big time. 14. Fights between founders. Fights between founders are surprisingly common. About 20% of the startups we've funded have had a founder leave. It happens so often that we've reversed our attitude to vesting. We still don't require it, but now we advise founders to vest so there will be an orderly way for people to quit. 15. A half-hearted effort. The failed startups you hear most about are the spectacular flameouts. Those are actually the elite of failures. The most common type is not the one that makes spectacular mistakes, but the one that doesn't do much of anything, the one we never even hear about, because it was some project a couple guys started on the side while working on their day jobs, but which never got anywhere and was gradually abandoned. In other words, starting startups is just like everything else. The biggest mistake you can make is not to try hard enough. To the extent there's a secret to success, it's not to be in denial about that.